Hi, my name's Pastor Brook McBride, and this is the third sermon in my sermon series called When I Fall. And this is the sermons that I preached this last Sunday. I'm going to try it on YouTube and see if we can make this work. I had a lot of comments about it, so I wanted to share it with you. And this is called When You Think It's God. When I was a student pastor in East Texas, I had a tragic situation that happened in our neighborhood. We had some neighbors, two little boys, a little 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, who lived in their mom's house. And their grandma lived just behind them. There was a wooded area in between them and some weeds and stuff. And so the mother often would send the two boys over to grandma's, and they would walk this path that they knew to grandma's, and she would call the grandma and say, "Hey, they're coming over, the boys are coming over, could you watch?" And so the mom and dad were trusting of these two little guys and the path they knew well. But one day they sent them out to go on the trip over to grandma's, and grandma called 10 minutes later and said, "Where are the boys? They're not here yet. Did you send them late or something?" And the mom said, "Well, I sent them 10 minutes ago. Why don't you just watch for them a little bit? They should be on their way." And 10 minutes later, still no boys, so they started searching. All of them started searching, and they could not find the boys. And so they sent out search parties from the neighborhood, and we went looking for these boys. And finally, one of the neighbors found on one of the fences one of the boys' pieces of clothing, and they walked and climbed over that fence and noticed on another even taller fence two items of clothing on this fence and gate. And finally they went over even a third fence, and there in the backyard of one of our neighbors was a swimming pool. The boys wanted to go swimming. They didn't know how to swim, and they drowned. It was a terrible, terrible tragedy for our community. And just like any Christian, in the midst of those, you want to share words of comfort, and you want to somehow say something, but what do you say in the midst of that struggle? I remember as a student pastor watching with anticipation what the pastor of this Baptist church might say to this community that was so grieving and so at loss. And so when I went to the funeral, I was so piqued with interest, and my heart needed to hear words of healing. And you can imagine my disappointment when the pastor began to try to share some of the reasons why he thought this was happening. And one he shared, which as I've heard before, is that God needed a couple of flowers up in heaven. And that's why he took these two little boys, so that they could be flowers up in God's heaven. No, I don't know if that's comforting to you, but it wasn't to me. I was so angry. Why would God want to take two beautiful children from their families and break those mom and dad and that grandma's heart in two just for a flower up in heaven? That didn't make sense. That didn't seem to jive with my understanding of God. The pastor went on to challenge the mom and dad about their faith. They weren't regular churchgoers. They went to church occasionally, maybe what we call C&E, Christmas and Easter folks. And so he, at the end of the message, turned to them and said, "Now listen, maybe God took those two boys so that you would get your faith story right. You're never going to see those children again unless you give your life to Jesus Christ right now." I don't believe that a funeral is a place to manipulate people who are in pain. And I was really struggling with this pastor and what he had done. I don't know if you've ever struggled, but we all struggle, don't we, with what to say in times like this. And sometimes I'm afraid we as Christians have done a poor job of representing the gospel. One of the reasons we struggle with these moments in time is because we have deeply ingrained in us this understanding of God that comes in conflict at a time of tragedy. We believe two things about God. We believe, first, that God is all-powerful. We've been taught that from the get-go of our existence, that God controls all things. We've been taught that in Sunday school. And our children, it's kind of innate in who we are. And the second thing that we believe is that God is all-loving. That no matter who God is, God for sure is a just God, a fair God, and who ultimately loves us and wants the best things to happen for us. Now, when these two things come together in times of tragedy, they don't work. They don't fit together. We have to give one up. Either God is not all-powerful, doesn't control everything, or God is not loving, and God is not just. God is a random God. If you look at some of the Greek literature about their gods, a lot of times those stories come that these gods are kind of random, and they're trying to explain some of the randomness of what happens in our lives. But we don't believe in a random God. We believe in a loving God. So what do we do? How do we explain this?